Hello, my name is Chris Thornberg, founding principal of Beacon Economics, here with another quarterly update for the Graziadio Business Review about the current state of the California and national economy. As you know, over the last few months, I have been relatively positive about where the economy is heading. Fourth quarter of last year, we had some pretty good growth numbers. The consumer came back to town, wealth numbers are up, consumer borrowing is moving ahead again, and all said and done, that combined with exports and the continuation of some of these economic stimulus programs is leading us to a fairly decent 2011. Of course, over the last couple months, there's been a number of shocks to the overall world economy, things, of course, that have concerned many folks, probably you, and of course has dominated the headlines. For one, of course, has been the relatively large increase in the price of oil, which has pushed gas prices here in California to over $4 a gallon in recent weeks. A lot of folks are asking, will this take the gas, if you will, out of the consumer? The answer, of course, is probably not really. Now, I realize that was a very economic way of saying we're not quite sure, but the uncertainty here is not because of where oil prices are today. When you think about oil and oil prices in the national economy, we often use the 1970s as the metaphor for what we think is going to happen as a result of rising oil prices today. That metaphor, however, is simply not really relevant to today's society. Americans are considerably richer on a per-person basis relative to what we were back in the 1970s. Equivalently, much more of our consumption comes from services, not goods. And of course, services, unlike goods, are not very oil dependent. All said and done, if you look at the oil consumption as a share of real economic output, you'd realize that we as a nation are much less oil sensitive than we used to be. On top of all this, drivers today have a lot more options. Back in the 1970s, when gas prices started to go up quite substantially, people had few places to turn to find those fuel-efficient vehicles. Today, it doesn't take more than a few minutes searching the internet to find numerous hybrid cars that will get, on average, 40 to 45 miles per gallon. What this says is, while certainly if oil prices continue to rise and stay at a high level, it could start to squeeze the consumer. Right now, at this level, it simply isn't a big issue. Another big issue in the world economy today, of course, is the tragedy that happened in Japan. As we know, with the large earthquake that occurred off the coast and the tsunami that followed, many people lost their lives, and of course, we have the ongoing crisis with the nuclear reactor in northern Japan. A lot of folks are asking, what does this mean for the world economic recovery? Well, the answer is, as much as this is a social tragedy, it is not an economic one. I have looked at many disasters in the past in the context of my work, and what I find is that we often underestimate the resilience of people and economies to bounce back from these sort of disasters. Does it create disturbance in the system? Absolutely. But this is business delayed, not business canceled. There will be a temporary slowdown in economic activity as a result of this crisis, but very quickly, the rebuilding efforts that will go on in northern Japan will help accelerate the Japanese economy forward, and if anything, could increase demand for U.S. exports rather than hurt them. So all said and done, while our hearts go out to those folks in Japan, please understand that this is not something that you need to worry about as a business person here in California. So what does it all mean? Well, we continue to stand by our forecast. We think 2011 is going to be a decent growth year, averaging somewhere in the 3.5% growth rate. There will be gains in the consumer side of the account, business spending will continue to accelerate, and exports will also continue to grow. Those will be more than enough to offset continued flatness in the overall construction sector and some mild negatives that are coming out of the public side of the overall economy, and will really very much carry us through probably into 2012. Now, beyond that, of course, we still have our long-run worries. There's a phenomenal amount of monetary liquidity floating around the U.S. economy, liquidity that will eventually need to be mopped up by the Federal Reserve, otherwise inflation is sure to occur. And of course, don't forget, the federal government right now is borrowing something on the order of $1.4 trillion a year right now to offset the large gap between its current expenditures and the revenues it's taking in. Neither of these issues is any threat to the U.S. economy in the short run. Clearly, the U.S. economy can continue to borrow, and that monetary liquidity is at this point in time non-inflationary because most of it's sitting in the banks in the form of excess reserves. But the risk is there, and frankly, the sooner we as a nation begin to start unwinding these policies, the faster we will be able to overcome the negative effects that this process will have on the economy, and of course we will also forestall any potential future crises. Unfortunately, in the current era of partisan politics, we have yet to see the kind of cooperation and bipartisan support necessary to create such a path. This worries me, but there's still time. For a download report and our outlook on where the economy is heading and various statistics having to do with both the national and state economy, please visit beaconecon.com. For now, this is Chris Thornberg, Principal of Beacon Economics, signing off for the Graziadio Business Review.